To go from waltz to rock and roll sounds nice, but how do we do it? How do we speed up climate action? One thing is for sure, you cannot do it alone. And our first guest today brings together countries and corporations. She is the head of the Climate Group. The non-profit group is also the secretariat for the Under 2 Coalition, which includes over 220 governments. So give a very warm welcome to Helen Clarkson.
It's a bit nerve-wracking to be introduced as waltz to rock and roll just after you've heard from a real rock band, but I'll do my best. Good morning, everyone. I'm really pleased to be here. Thank you for tolerating the switch of language there. My name's Helen Clarkson. I'm Chief Executive of the Climate Group. And as was mentioned, we're a non-profit organization headquartered in London, but working all around the world with businesses and with state and regional governments. I'm going to talk a bit about how we work. I said theory of change. I won't go too deep into it. But why we think business can really take leadership on the clean energy transition. And then this session is all about, we've said, the road from Katowice to 2050. I'm going to try and make a little bit of sense about what those words mean, where they've come from, why are we all talking about 2050. So just as a non-profit organization, we are mission-driven. Our mission is to accelerate climate action. We do a lot of work about taking things to scale. We talk about scale, pace, ambition. We're really trying to drive the pace of climate action because we have this very urgent goal, which is to keep the world below or as close to 1.5 degrees C of warming while ensuring greater prosperity for all. And that's really, really critical. There are ways to get to 1.5 degrees C which will really harm people. And what we know is the sooner we act, the more that we can do this in a just and fair way and ensure people have better lives. For those who like a bit of theory, as I said, I won't delve too deep in, just to say how we work. What we do is build these big coalitions of action, businesses and governments which have a commitment at the middle. And I'll talk about the sorts of commitments we make. We believe in making really big, bold, ambitious commitments and then working with those organizations to deliver on them. And then we use a bit of kind of carrot and stick. So the sticky bit is we do use measurement, reporting, verification to check in on how people are doing. It's not enough to just make a commitment. We need to see that you're acting on it. But then we also use communications, really positive communications about climate action. We want to inspire more action, so we show the good that's going on. We tell the positive stories. We look at how businesses are gaining business value, for example. So this is the ugliest slide, and I've just seen some really beautiful images go up before me, so I was dying with embarrassment, but it's not our forte, diagrams. We have 3 corporate commitments at the moment. EP 100, which is doubling energy productivity. EV 100, which is electric vehicle commitments. That's on lease and owned fleets, but also on charging infrastructure. So IKEA have made that commitment and have committed across both their fleet, the last mile delivery they're talking about, and also putting charging infrastructure in their shops, because you might not know where your nearest charging point is, but you often know where your nearest IKEA is. I realize that in Norway, you've got the deepest market penetration for EVs, but even there's still a lot more to do. And then RE100, I'm going to talk about in more detail. That's a commitment to 100% renewable electricity. And we're getting the bigger slide soon. We now have, as of this week, 161 companies. There's a prize if you can spot I think 2 Norwegian companies on there, but have made the commitment to 100% renewable electricity. And that 100% number is so, so critical. When I joined the Climate Group, I was sort of thinking, oh, some of these companies, only a couple, have that set out at 2050. That doesn't seem very ambitious. Why wouldn't we let them do more but do it sooner? And as I've got to understand this campaign better, you see the power of 100% commitment is that when you let companies set a 90% commitment, everyone in the company thinks they're in the 10%. It's like, well, it's nice that we're doing this, but it's not me. I don't have to do that. That's the 90%. I'm in the 10. When you set 100% commitment, first of all, you have to get the CEO to sign that, because you can't do anything at 100% in the company if the top don't know about it. So that automatically sends it up the hierarchy and shows that it's a very serious commitment. But it also means there's no one in the company who thinks it doesn't apply to them. And what we find then, that drives innovation. And we see companies hitting their targets well before they said they were going to. So Google already hit their 100% target. Now they're moving into kind of the quality and how they're delivering on that. We don't want it all to be through certificates and so on. So it's all about now new energy on the grid. But it's not a CSR play. It's not corporate social responsibility. It's really about business, returns. T-Mobile USA they estimate they're going to make $100 million of savings in the next 15 years through doing this. So it's a serious business play. That's at the micro, the company level. At the macro level, what getting that number of companies together does for you is it gives you this huge demand signal. So we're really interested in those demand signals to the market. If you add together the demand of RE100, you get to demand the size of a country. So it would be a 23rd biggest country in the world if you add together those companies. What that lets you do is interact with policy. So we talked about shifting markets, shifting policy. About 15 months ago, we went to the EU because the way that they had written their new clean energy regulations was going to make it harder for companies to deliver power purchase agreements. When you've got that size of demand, you can go to the EU and say, look, you're trying to do this, but actually what you're going to achieve is that. If you want to achieve this, these companies can help you write the regulation. So that's what we did. So that's the interaction between markets and policies. And then Siri mentioned the Under 2 Coalition. That's 220, mostly state and regional governments worldwide. Excuse me. You can see the coverage there. The blues are the states and regions. It looks smaller than it is because we've got 40 in Europe, so they're all packed in quite tight. And I'm very insistent that we use the correct map of the world, which shows Europe quite small. We've got a lot of coverage in South America. The greens are the national government endorsers, and we're really pleased that Norway is an endorser. And Norway has given us a very big grant to work, particularly with the forested companies in countries in South America, looking at the rainforest, looking at forestry. So really important interaction there between the national governments and those state and regional governments. We're very proud of this. Ban Ki-moon came out and said this. Actually, more significantly, last year, Yale did a report where they looked at all these kind of multilateral kind of groupings and found that Under 2 has the biggest potential for emissions reductions of all of them. RE100, which I talked about, came at number 5, so that was great. Under 2 at number 1. That is potential, though, so the really big job, and I keep saying this to our organizations, it doesn't matter if we don't deliver it. So that's the really big job for us, is how do we deliver those emissions reductions? And then finally on what the Climate Group does, this is just a pure advert plug. We run something called Climate Week in New York every September alongside the UN General Assembly. You're all very welcome. Come to New York. It's where we really talk about climate action. This year, the Secretary General of the UN is holding a summit on the first day of Climate Week for the heads of state. That will happen in the UN. It's going to get a lot of profile, a lot of attention. So if you want to sponsor Climate Week, catch me afterwards because you'll get a lot of profile. But anyway, that's plug. But it's a really, really great week where we really bring that comms to life. I said I'd give you a bit of context, like why are we calling this session Katowice? Apologies to those who know it. Some of you might have been at Katowice. Unlucky if you were, it was pretty miserable. But anyway, that happened in November. It was cold. But why are we there? What's this all about? Why are we talking about 2050? So this is your quick history lesson for those of you who haven't followed the UN climate over the years. 1992, it's fallen off the back of this graph, was when the first, the Earth Summit in Rio, the first agreement was signed, the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. That's where we all signed up and said, right, okay, we've got to do something at the UN level. It took till 97 for the first legally binding carbon emissions reductions targets for developed countries, that's the Kyoto Protocol, but we knew that we needed a much more universal agreement which had to bring in the developing countries. This was the really big sticking point. Until 2015 in Paris, where that was signed, it'd been very much developed, with China very much on the developing countryside, pointing the finger saying, historic emissions, you've all got to do more, leave us alone. And what they managed to do in Paris was to spin that around and say, all of us have got to do something. And that led to this framework around what they call nationally determined contributions, NDCs, which all the countries signed up to in 2015. There was also really critically in the Paris Agreement this commitment to well under 2 degrees C of warming with a goal of 1.5. But if you add together the current NDCs, they take us to 2.7 degrees of warming. That is absolutely catastrophic. So 2020, next year, all the governments have to come back and what we call ratchet. They need to turn up the dial on the NDC, and we need to get much more onto a much more aggressive pathway. All of this is looking at 2050. And I was thinking about 2050. It can seem a long way away. But if you go back that distance in time, 31 years, that takes you to 1986. I bet some of you still have clothes in your cupboard that you bought in 1986. So it's actually not that far away. I actually remember Norway winning the Eurovision Song Contest in 1985 because we had Norwegian au pairs, and it was very exciting. So that's quite recent maybe in some memories. 2050 is not far away. And we're going to get the Global Stocktake 2023, which is going to tell us how we're doing. And probably not that well is going to be the answer. Katowice, as was mentioned before, we agreed the rule book. How are we going to deliver this? How are we going to measure it? Other big thing that happened last year was the IPCC report. It's already been mentioned. So the world scientists came together, and what they were asked to do by the UN was, because of this thing in Paris, like well below 2, but let's aim for 1.5, they said, could you go and look at the science and tell us what's the difference? Is it matter? Does 1.5 versus 2, does it really matter? And unfortunately, the answer was a really, really shockingly big yes. So, you know, even those of us working in climate didn't quite expect the outcomes that came out of that report to say that, you know, at 2 degrees C of warming, 99% of the world's coral is just gone. There are huge impacts on the system that happen between 1.5 and 2 degrees. So we've got to get onto this 1.5 degree pathway. And what that means is a lot of these conversations can kind of get into a bit of a choice, like, oh, should we do renewable electricity or electric vehicle? No, you've got to do both. We've got to do everything. And we need to really aggressively move on this, cut our emissions, find new ways of doing business. And there is still time. There is just about still time to do this. And they found that it's technically feasible. Now, I normally end on a kind of, and here's a positive quote, and here's something nice. So that can look a bit doom and gloom as my last slide, but I do think it's a rallying cry to action. It's telling us there is time, we can do more, we can build a better world, but we've really, really got to get on with it. Thank you. I put a sunny slide. There you go. I left you with sun rather than glaciers.
Yes, and any questions, that's good, because if you do have questions for Helen, she's coming back in a panel, and just send them in on text messages. Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Helen.
Thank you.